The simplest form of storage in Azure is blob storage, or binary large object. And that's a storage architecture where you're simply taking individual, distinct, discrete units that can be very large and storing them. And then you're retrieving them, updating them, deleting them, whatever you need to do. Right? But this is something that's useful for things, for example, if you're writing apps that work with videos or images, or if you've got log files that are being stored as text files, right? Maybe you've got a system that periodically writes off its own log files, and actually some of the internal Azure systems use this, right? The idea is basically it's just very large scale, discrete entity storage. In fact, notice the one I didn't check, virtual hard drives. If you're using Azure, at some point underneath of it, you are using your blob storage or storage blobs, okay? And it's large amounts of unstructured data. And by large amounts, we're talking about up to that 500 terabyte limit of total storage. And we'll talk about two different types of blob storage, page blob and block blob. All right, block blobs, individual entities can be up to 195 gigabytes. All right, so in other words, up to 195 gigabytes per file. If you're using page blobs, that can be up to 1 terabyte per file. So, or per entity, depending on how you want to look at it. I tend to think of them as entities, but practically speaking, they're typically files. In any case, so you're talking about massive scale storage that is made available to you. All right, now this is going to be, and we'll take a look at this in a moment, all right, it's going to be organized into hierarchical containers. Okay? And you also have, and we'll talk about this, and this is absolutely critical, you have a lot of flexibility. In fact, really the most options within storage and how you secure blobs and the different levels that you can secure blobs, and we'll talk about that. Let's talk about the general structure first real quick, and this is not particularly complex. Let me just page that over there. All right, and so within your blob storage, you have three primary concepts, and that's really not so bad. First of all, as you always do, you have this concept of storage account. All right, and then a few things with the storage account. It's going to give you your base URL to your storage. It's going to define the overall storage limit. It's also going to be where you set up your primary and secondary key and have the ability to also set up some other security related factors. Okay, within the storage account, you then define containers into which you're going to place your blobs. So for example, as this says, I may have the Contoso storage account, and you're not going to be able to get Contoso as a storage account because the storage account name has to be unique, by the way, it has to be universally unique. Right? And then within the storage account, you're going to get different containers. Now, these are yours. Once you have a uniquely named storage account, then you create whatever named containers match your needs. And then within those containers, you start to store different blobs. So here I've got an images container, which not surprisingly is storing JPEG files. And then I've got a videos container, which is storing an MP4 file, right? And really, Azure doesn't care what the file is, doesn't care the file type. You're just storing files, you're storing binary blocks into the actual storage account. So that's the way it works, pretty simple hierarchy, storage account, right? The storage account defines your storage parameters and your basic security. The container then allows you to differentiate storage. And by the way, the container also has some very important security settings, and we'll talk about that, anonymous access settings really. All right, and then you have the individual blobs. So it's very simple architecture, very flexible and extremely scalable.